Hello and welcome back, and do you know what, I'm going to say it, this might be one of the most controversial comparisons I've ever made. It's not that these two NAS devices are particularly different, but I think right now, very few times have I ever seen a refresh of a series from a brand that has caused this much of an uproar. I'm of course talking about comparing the Synology DS923 against that of its refresh, the DS925. Two very similar NASes, but it has to be said, have caused quite a stir. And in this video, myself dressed in my finest Temu Tommy Vercetti shirt are going to help you decide which one of these deserves your data and, let's face it, your money. Straight out the gate, both of these devices support Synology DSM. They both got support for hard drives. They both support expansions to allow you to add 5 more drives. They've both got failover with network connectivity across 2 ports. They both arrive with 4 gig of ECC memory that can be scoped up to 32 gig when you need it. They've both got AMD embedded Ryzen processors there. So both of these systems are pretty darn similar, both of which with 3 years of warranty, both of which warranty that can be extended to 5 years overall, and both of which are arriving at an incredibly similar price point of around 550 knicker. So why exactly has everyone got their knickers in a twist? Well, this is probably the biggest reason. In this hand, I have a Synology hard drive. In this hand, I have a Seagate hard drive. But both of these drives are from Seagate. That's right. This drive is the Synology Plus series, and this is a 4TB model here. And this drive is a 24TB Seagate IronWolf drive. Now, at least at the time of recording, Synology's HAT 3300 series of hard drives use Seagate IronWolf drives, and it's built on top of that with Synology's firmware there. Now, that seems pretty straightforward, right? Creating drives that, are made by hard drive manufacturers, and then the brands themselves certify them for use. That's all fair and well. And if you look at the DS923, alongside obviously recommending Synology white label drives, there's also alongside that drives from the likes of Seagate, WD, and of course Toshiba. However, the newest generation of Synology NAS devices in the 25 series and above are all going to have a far more curated compatibility list of hard drives. And there's going to be some of you out there that go, so Synology was already trimming down the hard drives that you could use on your system with that little warning notification there saying this drive is unverified. If you use this, it's at your own risk, fine. However, the 2025 series of devices, if your drive isn't on that compatibility list, you can't initialize your system. You can't use it for boot. And unless you are utilizing an existing Synology system and migrating those drives over physically from an old to new system, you're going to have to use Synology's only drives. Now, for some of you, that's not even really going to be a problem, because you can get hold of Synology's Plus series of hard drives at similar price points as the likes of Seagate's IronWolf drives and the WD Red series of hard drives. However, that is not uniform. In many regions out there, you can't actually get hold of these drives in the same quantities or at the same pricing as that of alternatives from Seagate and WD. Now, this extends higher when you go towards the HAT 5300, the enterprise class series of hard drives. And if you go towards those, what you find is those pricing, and hopefully that will even out over time, are kind of crazy by comparison. And again, stock levels are nowhere near as available as they are from the likes of WD and Seagate. Now, hopefully this is something that will change over time, as will the current existing list of compatible drives on the DS925, which currently, at the time of recording, only lists Synology drives, which has certainly annoyed a lot of users. Now, whether that is because people don't like the idea they've only got one vendor of choice for their drives, or the fact that Synology's range of drives doesn't cover the full gamut when it comes to capacities, without sort of bridging over enterprise drives and standard class drives. Indeed, things like the 24TB drive from Seagate IronWolf here, this works on the DS923. It's not on the compatibility list, and it will show up as non-verified if you use it in that system. But it's the idea that it will work in this system, but if you put that drive in this system, the result will be that it simply will not let you initialize. Now, in terms of ports and connectivity, that is where we really do have to talk about some give and take. The more astute of you may have already noticed that this isn't actually the DS925. This is DS423, because the DS925 is over there doing its thing for the testing in the review that's hopefully live by now. But they're very similar in terms of look, so I thought I would use this here on the table rather than delay this video further. But on the give side of things, the newer generation DS925 has 2 x 2.5 gigabit Ethernet ports. That is Mwah! That is great news, right? Well, it is good news, but it is worth highlighting that one, the majority of other brands have already engaged with 2.5 gigabit Ethernet several years ago, as far back as 2019-2020. But more importantly, have you noticed something else that's different about these two boxes? Well, the DS923 may well only arrive with 2x1 GBE, which frankly, again, a few years ago, a lot of us were pissed off about. It has to be said that it also has the option to add 10 GBE. You can add a 10 gigabit Ethernet port to this. Now the price for that adapter does change. You can get it as low as 80, 89 Nika, all the way up to 150 in some places. But it allowed you to add a 10 gigabit Ethernet port, which meant if you were using 4 standard hard drives in this, you could comfortably hit somewhere at 400 to 500 megabytes per second, or if you use SSDs, potential full saturation. That is a cap that you're never going to be able to achieve on this. So again, this is really going to come down to you, the end user, how you plan to use your system, because this technically has a much better bandwidth out of the box included at the same price tag as this one. But just keep in mind, this one has an element of scalability that this one, for some reason, has had removed. Another thing worth touching on is that both devices support a 5-bay expansion, something I touched on earlier on, but the newer generation device uses a new expansion. Connected via USB Type-C, it still has to be a Synology expansion, and the differences in terms of performance with the eSATA version versus that of the USB version is pretty minimal. It has to be said they're not utilising USB 3.2 Gen 2 or anything, but still nonetheless I think a lot of users are pleased to see USB-C being integrated. It's just a real shame that you can't use third-party expansions on this, but I did think it was worth touching on. Both the new and the old generation device have got M.2 NVMe slots there that can be utilised for additional media, but do keep in mind that much like our discussion just now with hard drives, we're still waiting for full confirmation on utility of third-party M.2 NVMe's on the new DS925 Plus. The older generation device allowed you to only use Synology M.2 NVMe's for storage pools, but you could use third-party SSDs for caching. But again, we've gone to the compatibility listings, at least now at the time of recording, and there is still no presence of drives from Seagate, WD, Samsung or more to be utilised in the newer generation device yet. Which leads us to the other core difference between them, which is of course that CPU. The older generation device utilising an embedded AMD Ryzen R1600, a dual-core 4-thread CPU. Threads of course meaning you can assign individual virtual CPUs to things, or in containerization a little bit more. On top of that, alongside that, 4 gig of ECC memory that we've already touched on there. Now, the newer generation device is actually using a CPU that Synology have used in previous generations, but let's not be too harsh yet. This takes advantage of a quad-core 8-thread V1500B AMD embedded Ryzen processor. That's part of the V1000 series rather than the R1000 series. It has a lower clock speed, but the R1600 requires to reach its total higher clock speed burst. Its actual base level clock speed isn't as impressive once you break it out into the core power versus that of the threads in the cores. But on top of that, if you are going to be running containerization, virtual machines, that sort of thing, you actually find it a great deal more beneficial to have more cores and threads than you will enjoy with base power, because you want to be able to cut things up quite neatly. And although that CPU is arguably older, at least in terms of Synology's portfolio, it's worth highlighting that that CPU appeared on a much higher tier of Synology's portfolio in the past, in the 1821, the 1621, and other devices in the SMB segment of their portfolio. And that CPU has now been moved into this one. So it's actually a superior CPU, at least within the Synology portfolio. Whether you feel that, or you're someone that was hoping for integrated graphics, that was never going to happen, unfortunately. But nevertheless, comparing those two CPUs, I will say, even though there is a higher clock speed on the R1600, it does still result in a lower clock speed on the V1500B, being more desirable overall in terms of TDP, but of course having more threads and cores to be cutting around and spreading out across your workload. Even performance-wise, it's inarguable that the DS925 on its base hardware, if you have the same drives inside both systems, internally is going to give you better results here. Indeed, because of that greater external network connectivity, you're going to get better performance externally as well compared to the throttling of 2x1G. However, just keep in mind, of course, that this has that option to scale up. Now, I wish Synology would engage with even USB network upgrades to make adding 2.5 GBE and other network connections possible across their lineup. It's just not something they want to engage with. Also, we have to be realistic. One of the biggest minuses right now against that of the newer generation device is that reduced compatibility there, we have to acknowledge that because this device is utilizing presumably a PCB MOBO, the CPU, the hardware architecture that has existed across many other NAS devices before it, the justification for this device to only use these drives and not these drives and claim that these are unverified, claim that these are uncompatible, doesn't hold a tremendous amount of water when you think just 6 months ago, that same architecture, that same build was absolutely fine across the rest of the Synology portfolio to use non-Synology verified drive. Now, perhaps when I'm recording this, things are going to change. Maybe by the time this is available to you in the basket of your local eShop, that compatibility page will have increased to include Seagate, IronWolf and WD-Red, whether that is because they took the time to verify them or under public pressure. But nonetheless, right now at the time of recording, if you plan on not using Synology hard drives, that's really the only reason not to go for the newer generation device between these two. In most other regards, with the exception of that PCIe 10G upgrade, of course, the DS925 is the superior box at the same price, and if you have no plans to upgrade, it becomes even more appealing. But just keep in mind about that business with the hard drives. It's an odd decision, at least in terms of this portfolio, but I'm sure on a broader company policy it makes sense. But for me, it is still of a thorn in the side for a lot of users. Bottom line, the DS923 Plus is still a great box, and for some users, this device has made that device even more appealing. Now, below there is an article comparing both of these boxes over on NAS Compares, as well as links to purchase either of them from several different retailers. If you found this video helpful, and if you were going to go to those shops anyway, make sure those two things are true, please use those links. It results in a small commission coming here to me and Eddie at NAS Compares. It's just us doing what we do, and it really helps us keep doing it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.